My name is John Alexander. I'm Experience Manager at FamilySearch. Work on records, products, and the records experience on the website. Tell us about you, Josie.
Cool. So I'm Josie. I'm a user experience designer for FamilySearch, which means that I'm kind of like the bridge between the developers and then what users see on the site. So just making it work well and making it super easy to use for our users. So yeah.
So when something doesn't work and people blame the engineers, it's not necessarily their fault. That's what I just.
My fault.
It could be.
Could be.
Awesome. Today we want to talk to you guys about editing records, index records on our website, and go through a couple of examples on how you might do that, and hopefully share some tips and tricks and insight on why we're doing this, and maybe even a little bit about how things might look in the coming years. So, Josie, I want to ask you, why do we even edit records on our website? Why does this feature even matter?
Yeah, good question. So we know that we use volunteer indexers that come and find records that we give them on FamilySearch, and then they go through and type all the information that we have. And there can be a lot of mistakes made throughout that just because they're not familiar with the language, with the culture, with certain names, with people. Sometimes they're the original indexers wrote things incorrectly, or sometimes the people that were coming through and typing that information misspelled something or made a mistake. So that's why it's super important for us to be able to edit the records and go back and make changes, just because nothing's perfect the first time through. And sometimes even the record will say one thing, but it may or may not be your family member, and you know that they spelled their name differently or things like that. So humans make mistakes. There's always going to be mistakes. And it's just one way for us to go in and correct those mistakes.
Yeah, awesome. I was going to add too that more and more we're able to use computers and machines for automation around indexing, and there's a trade-off for that. One, we can go a lot faster. We can process. We can do a lot more records. But we also see more errors than even a human would typically make. And so one of the ways we're trying to balance that trade-off is to make it so it's easy, and we're able to correct our records so they get better and better over time, which we think is really important. And over the last year and a half since we've had just the first basic editing on our site, we've seen a lot of records improve. We've seen really great changes from our users, and so our records are getting better and better, and we're hoping for more and more engagement. So hopefully if you're here and listening to this, you can go out on the website, and when you find an error, you fix it, and that helps everybody else in the experience. Yeah, so totally. Awesome. What do you say we jump on the site and we'll take a look at a record?
Yeah, let's jump right in.
Okay.
One thing that you did say, John, about like records, it's important to remember is like we're having computers now help us index this information. And like you said, those errors can be very easy for humans to spot, but are difficult for the computer to understand. So that's why it's important that we have human people come in and correct those mistakes, just because it'll be super obvious to us, like a mistake or an error that the computer makes that the computer can't understand. So.
Yeah, and it's almost counterintuitive because I've heard a lot of people say, hey, computers are going to be able to do all of this work, or computers are going to replace FamilySearch indexing. And as we've actually started working with computers and started looking at what they're doing, computers they look like silly or dumb errors to humans, but you're exactly right. The computer only knows what we teach it. It's very methodical. It doesn't have any intuition. All of that, is from humans. So the interesting paradox is that the more we use computers, the more we need people to help correct and make those computers. And it actually makes the computer better and smarter over time. And so this is what we're saying. We don't need less indexing. We don't need less correcting. We don't need less people. We need more. And what we're going to see as we use computers is more volume, more records for people, because one of the things that isn't talked about as much is, we have over 4 billion images of records on our website, but we've only been able to index about 20% of them. And we're capturing and doing more and more images at such a rate that we're actually falling behind. So we need to go a lot faster to not just catch up at the rate of we're acquiring images, but start to surpass and just get all these records done. So these methods that we're showing you is how we're hoping that's going to happen. All right, I am going to jump to FamilySearch.org, and I am going to sign in. And under this, in the section across the top of the screen, we're going to go to search and then records. Now, this is the space where all of our historical records content is found. And I have a record here that I have specifically for this to give an example of what we're wanting to show. So if you notice, some of you probably noticed and said, oh, he spelled George with an A like George. Well, I knew that this record was here, and I also know that it needs correction. And so when I come in to look at this record, and I'm going to look at the full screen view, looking at this record in the 1880 census, you can see that it's likely that George with an A was indexed incorrectly. Now, I don't know, Josie, what do you think? How would I know that maybe George is not correct?
There are a couple of different reasons. It could be a relative of yours, maybe you knew him. Probably more common is the fact that you don't ever hear of the name George. And so it's kind of suspicious that it was probably just typed incorrectly.
Sometimes you just know. Now, we have this edit button next to it, and I agree with all those. Another kind of thing I noticed is that he's got a daughter, Georgia, and sometimes you'll see like the father, if it was spelled George, and a son, George with an O, that typically in families you see, especially given names passed down, spelled the same and not differently. So that being said, we still want to verify with the image that this index was created from. We can't just assume that it's George with an O when it's possible that somebody named their kid George. It's not out of the question, right? There are weirder things that have happened. So when I click on the edit button, we go to our correction experience, where we're asking we're asking people to help us improve the name, and it takes us to this image. Now, when we start looking into this image, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look through this list and look for this George Jones, George H. Jones, or in this case, George. And I can see him right here with all those other family members from the website. Now, look closer at the name here. Josie, if you can see that okay, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of looks like it could be an A, but we know. So we actually teach indexers to kind of put exactly what they see. In the past, we've told them to do that, but now we're trying to get the information a little bit more correct and not necessarily just like write exactly what they put. So in that case, we could say, like you said, the Georgia, that's an O. It just seems like it would make more sense if it's a George.
Looking on the site, you can sometimes look around for like other O's. So here's another George. This is interesting. And he also did that O like an A, but his A maybe looks a little different. And another thing, like you were saying, if this were your own family member, you saw this person in the tree, you looked at that, you could argue between O and an A for a long time. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but our system is based on alternate values. So even if this really were a George with an A, and we correct it to George with an O, users would be able to find it via both paths, which I think is really, really important. But for this needs a correction. And I'm going to respell George H as George H. And just looking at it like that, I feel a little bit better. Now, the next step, it has us highlighting on the image. So highlight the name you changed or select no highlight possible. So Josie, why are you asking me to highlight my change? Like, what does that mean? Why would we do that? Because I don't know. We don't highlight in indexing. We haven't done highlighting on words like this in the past.
Yeah, so highlighting is a way to help other users that come in and look at this record know what we were talking about. So I love this record. It's a great example because if we scroll up and down, you can actually see there's multiple Georges. I think John already pointed them out, but above there's a George.
There's a Karen George.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of different Georges on this
popular
record.
Name. Yep.
For sure. And so the highlight helps other users when they come through and look at this record and want to see, okay, like why was this change made, or where can I find this information? It calls out exactly on the record where you were making the correction. So that way they can easily link up which George you were correcting and just see why you made that change.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do, if I click the highlight button, it gives me this blue outline and puts this thing, and it reminds you like, hey, we're just draw a box over George H on the document below. So I love that clear instruction, and I'm just going to drag and drop. And if I didn't like the drag and the drop, I could move this around. You know, you can resize it. It gives you plenty of time to kind of get the highlight right the way that you want. And then it checks like you did that, good job. And so I'll move on, do the same thing with the surname. And I might expand that a little bit so I get all of the J. And there we go. 2 highlights, 1 for each of the name parts. Now, let's talk about the third step, Josie. I love how you were saying this is really to tell other users, I'm talking about this George. There might be lots of other George on this image. There might be, different family members. This is the one I'm correcting, and it's clear to others. Let's in the reason, we're asking you to say, hey, was this indexed correctly initially? Which I believe this was, that the indexer should have or could have typed it with George with an O. But there are other reasons that users might also select on why they corrected. And again, all this is doing is communicating to other users why they made the correction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so indexing correctly, like you said, John, it's when someone typed it in incorrectly when they were reading the record the first time. And then there's also one that says wrong in the document. And that would be like if the indexer, the person that was taking the census went and knocked on George's door and they wrote his name down incorrectly. And you know who George is, he's an ancestor or someone that you know. At that point, you would say that this was wrong in the document because the original person that was taking the census had written it incorrectly. So
yeah,
like you said, there's those 2 different ways of how we can tell other users why we made that change.
Yeah, I love, we have a coworker whose great grandmother was named Merry Christmas, and it was spelled Merry, but in many of the censuses that were taken, when they said Merry Christmas, the census taker wrote down Mary, which is the traditional way to write Mary, but their family obviously all knew that it was Merry. So it was actually wrong in the census. And again, we're not deleting one value or the other. We are keeping the alternate value. So if a user now searched for George H. Jones or George H. Jones, in both cases, they're going to find the record and they'll be able to see the corrections. We have this spot for an optional note. It's optional, like it says. I like to provide a reason for the change and what I think I was doing, but some other users have put links to other records to say, this is how I know that it's George and not George and things like that. And so that is up to the user. But again, we're trying to inform other users on the website why we made the correction and trying to be helpful. And we found really great input from our users on this. Okay, so this note says success. Please allow a few minutes for your correction to become searchable. Thank you for improving our records. So let's talk a little bit, Josie, about the history. Tell me about what I'm seeing up here now that's different than before we made the artist.
Yeah, so like you had said, John, we're not replacing the information that was there, but we're adding to it. So underneath, you can actually see the previous information that was indexed, where it says George H. Jones. And then we also have the new additional, which is the current information that's there, where it says George H. Jones. So you can actually always see the changes that have been made. We're going to keep those there for you. That way they're still searchable. You can still find it that way or see the changes that people have been making to that record.
Yeah, and all right now, and it seems to be working really well. Typically the most recent change by a user is the most accurate change. And so the default, what's going to kind of be shown at the top is the most recent change, but we can show a full history. And another thing I was going to add, we're really trying to avoid like edit wars. Like if Josie and I strongly disagreed if it was George versus George, we don't accept the same change that we've already had. So we might say, hey, we have a version of George, and we're going to keep it this way. And that way, like this list doesn't just growing back and forth between the two.
Yeah, so we wouldn't have multiple Georges or Georges back and forth.
That's right. We don't want multiples of the same value, but someone could come on and say, oh, it's, something totally different, or I think it's a third a version or something, and we'll accept that. So now notice that the edit button changes from edit to view/edit. When we click on the view/edit, and what we're doing here is really important. So notice we're using the highlights that the user provided, and we're showing the history right on the image. And so again, this is why we're asking to highlight. This was the George H. Jones or the George H. Jones I was talking about. We're showing the user, the name of the user, the date they made the correction, and then all of the information that was created. Now, if you were looking at this, Josie, you could make a new edit and provide a third or a different version if you felt like that was different. But because I can view it, I can come in and edit my own changes. Nobody else but me can do this. So if I went to bed at night and was like, you know what, it really wasn't George. I should have stayed George, and I think I made a mistake. I can come back, click this edit. I can update anything I change it back, and even delete my edit if I want to. And again, only the user themselves that made the change has the ability to delete their own edits. You couldn't delete mine, Josie.
Yep.
So don't try it. You might try it. Don't try it. Cool. So I want to come back. It's been a few minutes. I want to come back to this original search that I did. So I'm running the search again for I'm going to do it exactly the way I did before, Josie, just so that we can see what happens. George H. Jones, born 1840. Now, notice that here, because the user searched for a George H. Jones, the record came up the exact same way it came before we did the correction. However, when I click on the record details to view more details about the record, we can actually see that, hey, it did say George H. Jones in the initial index, but somebody's made a change and now it's George H. Jones. So if I come back to the same search and I change my search to the new corrected version, and now that it's more correct, there's a lot more George H. Joneses. Here they are, and it's the later census. I had to add the place Tennessee, but it's the same family. There's Georgia, who we talked about. It shows here in the results George H. Jones, and then when I click to view the record, again, we can see the same record with the change history. We also use all this data for hinting in the tree, and sometimes the names are seriously wrong or even missing. So often a correction can result in a hint being picked up in our hinting engine, which allows family members and others to find the record and attach it to the tree, which is really our goal, what we're trying to do. Okay, Josie, let's do a different kind of correction. So this is a name correction. How about we look at a place or a date correction? We're now going to go to a record we had found.
Yeah, so this one is a record for William McKay. And we were looking at the event place, and we recognized that Morgan County is actually not inside of Ogden City, inside of Utah. It doesn't, that's not a place.
Ogden isn't in Morgan County. It's, this string is kind of nonsense, right?
Yeah, so Ogden is actually in Weber County. So
yeah, and I mean, and I asked again, like how you might know that, but you know, you're from that kind of area in Utah, and so am I. And so sometimes people will see something like this and just know that there's an error and that it's wrong, right? All right, so let's fix it.
Yeah, so if we zoom in on the image, you can see where it says Ogden, Utah. It doesn't give us much more information than that. So from there, we can actually go to the event place and start typing in Ogden, Utah.
Here's something interesting. If you look at the date of the record, the person was born in 1887, but it was this is a World War I draft registration card, which were created in 1917 or 1918. So we actually have two Ogden options. One would be for the state, because it went from being a state to a territory. And this is maybe a more advanced feature that people can worry about, but you're right. The 1896 to present version is more accurate. If this were from a record before 1896, technically the Utah Territory version would be more accurate.
And then same thing we did with the name correction. We're just going to want to highlight that, telling other users where we found this information on the record.
So would you, Josie, highlight just Ogden, or would you highlight Ogden and Utah?
So I would probably highlight the whole place, everything that you can find on the record.
Okay, cool. And again, reason for change is this was indexed incorrectly, right? And I'll even say Ogden is in Weber County, not Morgan. So there we go. We're going a lot faster on this one. And it's the same kind of alternate value model where it does take a few minutes for the change to be searchable, but you know, like we demoed, it really is just a few minutes, a little bit of processing time, and then others users will more easily be able to find these records because of the corrected change. So plea to everybody, your involvement, your corrections make our records better. It helps the whole FamilySearch community. And we hope that you'll be able to find, and as you find errors, that you'll be able to correct them. So thanks for being here.